Was the most impactful defensive addition made by the Falcons this offseason the hiring of new defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Serious Black, a.k.a. the Iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. AKA. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we are joined by Marc Raimondi of ESPN, who covers the Falcons for that illustrious website. And we'll talk about the Falcons offseason so far, their draft plans, the latest Kirk Cousins trade rumors. So without further ado, let's jump right into that conversation with Marc Raimondi right now. We are back with an illustrious guest. He is none other than Marc Raimondi, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for ESPN. And we're going to be talking all about this Falcons offseason. You've heard from me guys on this podcast for the last couple of weeks of how disappointed I am with the Falcons offseason so far. We'll see if Marc shares those sentiments. We'll talk a little bit more about whether the Kirk Cousins trade will fall through, as well as if the Falcons absolutely have to nail this draft. But Marc, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
Thank you. Illustrious. That's quite the adjective. I appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Marc, I went into this offseason thinking the Falcons would be a little bit more aggressive, trying to upgrade what was a underwhelming defense in 2024. And I feel like the Falcons are seemingly, based off of the moves they've made on that side of the ball, more content with seemingly to kind of hold serve and hoping that they can, rather than getting significantly more talent on the football field than they had in 2024, it's more about what the new coaching staff and Jeff Ulbrich being the defensive coordinator now will be able to get out of this collection of players. So I'm curious, when you look at the Falcons offseason moves so far, do you feel like this is all part of some grand plan that the Falcons have had from the jump, or do you feel, similar to I do, a little disappointed by what the Falcons have done so far?
I definitely agree with you when you say that this offseason, at least on defense, has been like, all right, what kind of role players can we get to fit into a Jeff Ulbrich type of system? And that's kind of what it seems like it's been. And part of that has just been out of necessity, right? Because they didn't have a ton of cap space, and they were kind of, and not to disparage anyone that they signed, but they were kind of shopping a little bit like in the value area, like instead of like the high profile big money premium free agents, and that's okay. That's okay. And I think that it was the plan all along, but I think the plan all along was Kirk Cousins as the starter, a playoff team, a 10-7, an 11-6, maybe even a 9-8 playoffs. And then you're going into the offseason with a completely different complexion of what it could look like. Then you're looking at an offseason where, hey, we don't have a lot of cap space, but we made the playoffs. We're a few players away, Obviously, it didn't work out with Jimmy Lake as well on defense, and they think that, that it was a big upgrade to Jeff Ulbrich on defense. But, yeah, I mean, I understand if you're a Falcons fan going, like, there's a lot of holes, right, on the defense. Where is help coming from? And maybe it's the draft. Maybe they do hit on a couple picks in the draft, the first and second rounds. I feel like they do kind of need to. But right now on paper, I'm not sure if this is a better defense personnel wise than it was in January.
Yeah, I think you make a great point with in the alternate reality that we are not unfortunately living in, the reality where Kirk Cousins comes in and plays well down the stretch and this Falcons team makes the playoffs, sort of this relatively quiet offseason would make a lot more sense for the Falcons. I guess the struggle is, like, that may have been the plan, a year ago with what you were doing. But I think based off of the disappointing finish to the season, that maybe you need to accelerate those plans moving forward. But I'm curious, when you look at some of the offseason moves, is there one that stands out that you feel like could be the most impactful for this Falcons team, whether that's, the change at center, whether that's the additions on special teams, or any of these defensive players that you feel like could really move the needle for this Falcons team the most in 2025?
I think the biggest was probably hiring Jeff Ulbrich, right? And the guys that he's brought in with him from the Jets, and of course, Coach Ollie, who was with Houston. I think that's probably been the highest profile and possibly the most impactful addition. You could argue Leonard Floyd, probably, a guy that has not had fewer than 8.5 sacks in a season since 2020, whereas the Falcons have not had anyone with 8.5 sacks in a season or more since 2017. So, I mean, I would say Leonard Floyd is probably an upgrade over anyone the Falcons had in 2024. The thing is that you want to pair him right with another very potent pass rusher, and maybe that ends up being Arnold Abichetti. Maybe that ends up being whoever they draft. I don't know, but so you could say on that front, there's a potential improvement on the edge. On the interior of the line, you lose Grady Jarrett, who maybe 2024 was not his greatest season. Certainly, he's probably past his prime, but is a guy like Morgan Fox going to fill the shoes of a guy that wasn't the most productive season for Grady Jarrett, but still a very solid a solid year, right? He was still a good player, a plus player. Did they upgrade with Morgan Fox, or did they just get cheaper? They're probably hoping for both. I think one thing about if you kind of look at the stereotype of Terry Fontenot as a GM, it's like the drafts have been a little iffy, but free agents have usually hit. And so if you're a Falcons fan, I guess you can hope, you can have a little faith in that, they do a good job on the pro scouting standpoint. And then the drafts, it's gotta be defense. I mean, that's not I'm not saying anything that's an inside scoop.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll talk more about, what their draft plans are and sort of how critical it is to their success this upcoming season. But, one of the maybe not necessarily the move that's going to help this team the most on the football field, but it's certainly probably the most notable and high profile move that the Falcons have yet to make, is whether or not they trade Kirk Cousins this offseason. And so I want to discuss sort of your confidence level as we sit here about a month away from the draft, exactly 4 weeks away, as we record this. What is your confidence level that Kirk Cousins will not be an Atlanta Falcon this season because the Falcons are successfully able to trade him? We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. See, this time of year, guys, you start to be a little bit more conscious of where your money is. And sometimes you'll look at your bank account and wonder, where did all this money go? Right? Between dining out, entertainment, online shopping, and other things, it's easy to lose track of your money. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just any old budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you can just stop managing your money and actually start building wealth. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money, and you can use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. So here with Marc Raimondi of ESPN talking about the Atlanta Falcons. And I had your colleague who also covers the Atlanta Falcons, Josh Kendall, on back in February and asked him.
My rival,
yes.
Josh Kendall.
And I asked him basically, what were the odds that the Falcons would be able to find a trade partner for Kirk Cousins? And he says 50-50. And I was like, I don't agree with you, Josh. But as we sit here today, it does feel like, Josh's projection seems a little bit more accurate. It's certainly more accurate than my projection at that time when it comes to Kirk Cousins' ability to trade him. And so I'm just curious, as we sit here about a month ahead of the draft, and there's various reports that suggest that Kirk Cousins is going to wait until after the draft to waive his no trade clause because he doesn't want to basically get stuck in a similar situation that he had found himself in Atlanta, thinking I'm going to be the guy, and then the team winds up using a first-round pick on a quarterback, and then basically it's a ticking clock on his time as a starting quarterback moving forward. So he'll wait to see, what some of these teams do in the draft before, deciding to waive his no trade clause. But I'm curious, as we sit here about a month out, whether it's 50-50 or some other percentage that you want to put on it, how confident are you that the Falcons will be able to find a trade partner for Kirk Cousins this offseason?
It's so hard to say, and I think that a lot of it is going to depend on certainly the draft, but also what happens during the offseason program. Does anyone get hurt during OTAs? I mean, we could be talking about going to training camp. Like, quarterbacks are going to get injured. Like, there's just no way around that, right? And is that then the impetus? Is that then the catalyst for Kirk Cousins getting traded if someone goes down early or even during the season, before the trading deadline? That's all possible, but it really is. It's a complete crapshoot. It seems like, for the most part, as we speak here, in at the end of March, most teams have at least an outline of their plan for what they're going to do at quarterback, with the exception of maybe the Steelers. I mean, people are still waiting for Aaron Rodgers. It looks like maybe the Browns draft a quarterback there. They could be in a position to draft a quarterback. It seems more and more like Cam Ward is going to go number 1 to Tennessee. So the amount of teams that, whereas a few weeks ago there were a few teams that could be in play for a Kirk Cousins trade, there are fewer now, right? As we sit about a month from the draft, that could change. Is JJ McCarthy not, all the way there? Does that make them want to get an Aaron Rodgers? Maybe I don't think Kirk wants to go back to Minnesota when he knows that, that seat is going to be very warm and that JJ McCarthy is going to be the heir. It's a complicated situation, and it's a situation that the Falcons did not want themselves to be in, but it's certainly a situation that they could have foreseen. I mean, this is a foreseeable situation. Even as the moment they drafted Michael Penix Jr., it was a foreseeable situation that this could very well happen, and here they are. And I think they're just gonna have to wait to see what happens around the league and hope that a shoe drops and they can get some compensation if it's 2026 draft, whatever it is, free some of that salary cap, maybe make some late acquisitions. But it's certainly not. It wasn't the plan, but this is where things are.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. We'll see how they all sort of shift, and I'm sure there will be plenty of reports and rumors all the way leading up to the draft, and then potentially after the draft. With that, I'm curious. Do you feel like if the Falcons can't get that trade going, and we're sitting here, at mandatory mini camp in May or in June and whatnot, and Kirk shows up, and is there going to be some awkwardness? How do you sort of foresee that situation? Is it just going to, I'm just curious, as someone who's going to be in that building and going to be sticking a microphone in Michael Penix's face and in Kirk Cousins' face, as well as Raheem Morris and everybody else in that building, and probably asking them, how you guys feeling about the quarterback situation? How do you sort of see that playing out?
Awkwardness, certainly, certainly a little bit of awkwardness. There was awkwardness even, this season to a degree, right? Especially toward the end of the season or the middle when Cousins started struggling. The question was every week, are they going to move on from him and finally to have Michael Penix Jr. I think everyone involved here, they're professionals and they're adults, so I think that from that perspective, it's like I think they all understand how the business of the NFL works, Kirk Cousins included. So I don't think it'll get to any kind of level of like unprofessionalism, if that's a word. Did I create a word? I saw someone, I forget who it was on Twitter, at some point say that Kirk Cousins being like a kind of a stand-up guy and kind of being like what most people feel is a nice guy is almost an impediment to him getting what he wants from the Falcons, which is them, moving him to somewhere else or even, releasing him. And I forget who it was again, but they were like, if Kirk Cousins turned heel, if we were just talking about wrestling before we went on the air. But yeah, if Kirk Cousins all of a sudden became a villain and kind of put pressure on the Falcons, that could be a different story. But I just don't see that happening. I don't see that in Kirk Cousins' character. But we could find out some things when the show Quarterback comes on Netflix in July. That should be interesting to see how they chronicle the 2024 season with Kirk Cousins as the Falcons QB.
Yeah, well, not to veer the conversation off into a wrestling conversation, but
why not?
John Cena's a stand-up guy, and all of a sudden he's
that's true,
doing stuff, embracing guys, and then getting the kill sign and doing stuff. So it's like it's a
That's
similar.
true.
I need someone to just meme Kirk Cousins' face on top of John Cena and put that video out there. So it's like anything's possible at this stage, right?
I can promise you that Kirk Cousins during this offseason is not watching John Cena film to see how he executed his heel turn. I don't think that would be the case. I will not say the same thing for offensive line coach Dwayne Ledford, who is a massive wrestling fan, and his kids. But Kirk, nah, not a big wrestling guy. We talked about it quite a bit during the season. Not a huge wrestling guy. Knows a little bit, but I don't think he's turning heel on us, Aaron.
Okay. Well, Kirk, if you're
Would
out
be
there,
entertaining. I can't.
yeah. So let's talk about this Falcons draft and how critical it is for this Falcons to nail this draft. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is going to give you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins, and that's $200 to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, or even who's going to cut down the nets. And we are not getting any Cinderella stories because we got all 1 seeds for only the second time in the last 40 years. It has been in the NCAA tournament, but you can make sure you head on over to FanDuel to see which one of these 1 seeds is going to go all the way. And the beautiful thing about FanDuel is you win. When you win, you get paid instantly, so you don't have to wait around and worry about some future bracket busting or whatever. But we're near the end of the bracket season, so make sure you don't miss this opportunity by going to FanDuel.com, and don't miss your chance at $200 in bonus bets and get in on the college hoops action before this tournament is done. So wrapping up here with Marc Raimondi of ESPN, and we are talking about how critical this draft is, right? We've talked about how the Falcons haven't necessarily made the big needle-moving moves on the defensive side of the ball in free agency. They've sort of filled some holes, plugged some holes, got some stopgaps, some veteran guys, some other young guys and whatnot, but not necessarily where you sit here, and if I believe you said it earlier, Marc, you feel like they've definitely upgraded their defense, and if they're going to do that, it's going to require this team to hit on some draft picks. That has not been something that this team has had a ton of success outside of round 1, where you've gotten immediate impact players. But I'm curious, does it feel like, I guess I'll ask you the question, like, how confident are you that will change this offseason and they'll be able to potentially find 2, 3 or more guys in this upcoming draft class that can come in and fill some of these starting spots on this defensive side of the ball and really move the needle forward?
Well, one thing that works to the Falcons' advantage is that it is a good draft when it comes to the front seven, especially when it comes to, edge rushers and interior defensive line talent. There are there's good players into the second round that could potentially make an impact, that could potentially start for NFL teams. So that's, at least on paper, right? We never know how these things work out, but it does seem like this is a beneficial draft if you're in need of that type of a player, which the Falcons happen to be. So I think that most likely number 15, they probably go who they feel is the best player available at defensive tackle or edge or corner. I know that the conventional wisdom is that, hey, Falcons need an edge rusher, right? That is true. Obviously, they've needed one for a very long time, but there are other holes. And if you can get like someone like a Will Johnson from Michigan at number 15 and plug him in next to AJ Terrell in your secondary at corner, that's not bad. If a guy, drops, a Kenneth Grant drops to, number 15 at defensive tackle, you're gonna pass him up for Mike Green or for a James Pierce Jr.? I don't know. Probably not, right? You're gonna want that guy. So you would imagine that at number 15 there will be options for the Falcons, and that player, again, on paper, we never know how these things turn out, could be a starter, for them on day 1. And then you go into the second round, there could be someone like that as well in the second round. The problem is that they don't have enough picks, because then that's it until the 4th round, and then they got 2 7s, and that's, you're not going to probably find an impact player, that late on day 3. Could they move down? Certainly. I think that's definitely a possibility, and I think that if they move down and got more picks, I think if they're in the late first round, there's probably a guy out there that they would be happy with and fans would be happy with who is still available. Maybe. and then maybe there's a guy in the third round or whatever they can get, another, who knows. But yeah, the point is that certainly you would, if you're a Falcons fan, you would love for them to hit on at least two of these picks, the first and second round, and then hope for the best that they trade down.
Yeah, and I'm curious, talking about the trade down, where it does feel like, with only 5 picks, a first, a second, a fourth, and 2 sevenths, that's a pretty narrow bullseye that you're going to have to hit, given some of the needs that the Falcons are going to have there. There's no leeway, and so one of the benefits of having more draft picks is it means that you don't necessarily have to bat 1,000 when it comes to hitting on some of these particularly early on picks. So I'm curious, do you feel like a trade down are we at a stage where it's inevitable for the Falcons, particularly in those early rounds, whether it's round 1 or round 2, or it's just more of a, yes, this would make sense for the Falcons, but as we always talk about with trade downs, it takes 2 to tango, and you don't quite know, how the board is going to fall, if there's going to be a guy that teams are going to be willing to trade up for, and it's just more of a possibility at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's what you just said, right? It's like, would it be beneficial for the Falcons to trade down? Absolutely. Does that mean they're going to find someone that's going to want to do that? No, because these teams are thinking the same thing. It's like, oh, we could probably get a similar guy at number 25 than we can at number 15, and so on and so forth. So it may not be easy to do. I think that the most likely scenario is that night, right? We're getting close to number 15, and a team in the back of the first round sees a guy that they really want, that they think is a stud, that they think is a can't miss, and he's not going to fall to 27 or to 23. They have to go up. They have to get to number 15, trade with the Falcons, and get whoever that guy ends up being. But there's a good chance that whoever that guy is might be a guy the Falcons want. So it's hard. It's hard to say. It doesn't seem likely, I think, at this stage, but certainly they're gonna circle the wagons on that and have discussions with pretty much every team down in the end of the first round and beyond.
So we're about a month out, Mark. Where's your confidence level that this Falcons team will be able to nail the draft this year? Is it we'll see, or is it like, hey, it has to work? So it's got, where are you at with your confidence in this team's ability to nail this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think because there are that many good players and there is depth at the positions of need, I think Falcons fans should feel cautiously optimistic, Aaron, is what I would say, right? Because you just never know. The draft is a complete crapshoot, but there are definitely guys that project, and there are guys that were productive. Some of those guys are the same guys. Some of them are not, right? Some guys project only, some guys produced only. But there are guys out there that should be there at number 15, maybe even in the 20s if they move down, that could potentially be guys, could potentially be, starters or impact players on day one, or at least down the line. You pair someone like that with a Leonard Floyd, you have a Jeff Ulbrich defense, maybe. Again, Arnold Ebiketie has a breakthrough season, which I think is possible. I really do. Maybe Rook Arororo breaks out in year 2, and you get play from Brandon Dorlus that he really wasn't able to show last season, and then beyond. A JD Bertrand breaks out as an inside linebacker. Divine Diablo has a season that you don't expect. I think there's a lot of what ifs on this team, right? There's a lot of what ifs on this defense. But confidence level it's like any other draft. It's like, it seems like there's a better chance than many years to get a defensive talent early, and maybe in the second round as well. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. Given the perception of this draft and how deep it is at both edge rusher and defensive tackle, I think optimism is the key word when it comes to addressing the front. I think the caution comes in where you're looking at some of the potential holes on the back seven that the Falcons also need to plug, because, from what I gather, and I'm sure as we get closer to the draft, we'll have more people come on to talk about these things here on Locked On Falcons. But it doesn't feel like the talent level is quite there at positions like corner, safety, and linebacker this year. So I think that's going to be a harder needle for the Falcons to thread in that regard. And does that mean that they prioritize those positions a little earlier in the draft where that talent is there and wait, for the D tackle? Because we definitely know that they're definitely taking an edge rusher in round one, because it's just impossible for this team to do.
I wouldn't say definitely, but you have to think that given the amount of money that edge rushers are getting right now, right? Like, that's going to be the only way to get a stud edge rusher unless you have an insane amount of cap space, which it doesn't look like the Falcons are going to have for quite a while. When you think about all the young players that are going to be coming up in the next few years, what are you going to do with Kyle Pitts? Drake London is the year after that. Bijan Robinson is after that. And then, oh, by the way, Michael Penix Jr., you got to pay him at some point too. So it's like, when are you going to be able to have the flexibility cap-wise to sign, a Max Crosby or a Myles Garrett or a Micah Parsons or a Trey Hendrickson, and it goes on and on and on. But you could get that guy yourself in the draft and build them up, and maybe Jeff Ulbrich is the guy to do that.
Yeah, I think this draft has the potential to be. We could be looking back at this draft as being like, oh, that was the sort of break point for the Falcons, and similar to there's wrestling before the NWO and wrestling after the NWO. There may be a Falcons draft and defense that is like, hey, before the 2025 NFL draft, there was the Falcons defense, and after the 2025 NFL draft, there's a different era of Falcons defense, an attitude era, you might say, when it comes to the Falcons defense. We can all hope for that. But Marc, I really do appreciate you coming on, sharing your insights into the Atlanta Falcons. I know you have, a book coming out about wrestling for those folks out there that have just been staring at that poster.
It's not very subtle, right?
Yeah.
Like promotional strategy is not too subtle.
So I will give you the floor to plug whatever you're going to plug. I have no idea what you're possibly going to be plugging here on the show.
Well, yes. If any Falcons fans are wrestling fans, WCW was based in Atlanta at CNN Center, owned by Ted Turner. So I have this book coming out about the NWO. If you're a wrestling fan or you have any even tertiary knowledge of wrestling, you probably know what the NWO was from the 90s, especially if you're of a certain age, like Aaron and me are. Comes out June 24th, but it's available right now anywhere you purchase your books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. You can go to walmart.com and get this thing. I can't believe it. That's crazy. That blew my mind. So yeah, anywhere you want to get, anywhere you get your books, it's available now. If you're a wrestling fan, if you were a wrestling fan, if you know nothing about wrestling and you want to find out why people are wrestling fans, and also how wrestling has shaped the culture, pop culture, and even politics of the United States of America since the 90s, this is the book for you.
There you go. And Marc also covers the Falcons for ESPN, so
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that also exists too. So if in addition,
you can also follow me on Marc Raimondi on Twitter, X, whatever the hell they call it now, and Marc Raimondi Sports on Instagram. But that's mostly going to be wrestling content. So.
Yeah, there you go. So Marc, really appreciate your insight into this. We'll see what the Falcons do in the draft. We'll see if there's they can build let's say a wolf pack, that some might say, when it comes to their defensive pass rush this upcoming.
I mean,
season.
they've been looking for a good edge rusher for life, Aaron. So I think they could probably use one in this draft.
And if they nail this draft, it might be just too sweet. All right.
What a bunch of nerds. What a couple nerds.
there would be some listeners that really appreciated it.
Yeah.
3 minutes, and there's going to be a bunch of listeners like, all right, guys, like, thank you.
They've already turned off.
Yeah. So, to all those folks, we will be back with more content here on Locked On Falcons. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Go check out Marc's stuff. Go check out the book as well. Appreciate you, Marc, for having for joining us here on Locked On Falcons.
My pleasure. Thanks, man.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Thanks to Marc Raimondi for joining us on today's episode. We should be joined by Dave Choate of the Falcoholic himself, and we'll talk more about, the upcoming draft plans for the Atlanta Falcons. So that is in store for you as your first listen tomorrow. So continue to be in every day by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available, which will be tomorrow. And Of course, for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast to get you geared up for all things 2025 NFL Draft. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.